The 2024 Chicago White Sox had the most losses in a season in MLB history last year. With a 40-121 record, there's no question the 2024 version of the White Sox underperformed everybody's expectations. Luckily for the organization, you never have to think about that ever again. There's a completely new vibe to this White Sox roster, there's a lot of new players, there's a lot of young talent coming up, and there's some hope for this White Sox franchise. So let's put that season in the rear view, and let's talk about an interesting 2025 Chicago White Sox team that I personally don't believe is 121 loss bad. Before I get into where the team ranked last year and where their prospects rank for 2025, I want to let you know that everything here is going to be completely objective. I'm going to put my formula for the rankings in the description. All of the stats for the MLB ranks are going to be coming from Fangraphs, and all of the prospect stats will be coming straight from Baseball America. So as I mentioned, the 2024 Major League version of the White Sox left a lot to be desired on the field. Their pitching was a tick ahead of their lineup and defense, but that wasn't great either. You see 30th for the complete roster, 30th for the lineup, 30th for the defense, and then 27th for the rotation and 28th for the bullpen. So there were some ups and downs in the rotation and bullpen areas. The defense and lineup was pretty much down for the entire year. The biggest area for optimism for this entire organization is their prospects. With my prospect formula, they came in at the number 16 spot, and they have a really solid crop of minor league pitchers. Some of the top prospects in all of baseball are in their farm system as pitchers. Along with those pitchers, they didn't come ranked as high with their hitters, but there are some really solid minor league options and a couple guys that are going to be contributing to the major league roster as soon as this season. So let's get straight into the team overview. I'll go right into the brain trust here. The manager is Will Venable. This is going to be his first season with the Chicago White Sox after Pedro Grifol was fired after last season. Venable is a former Major League outfielder and a highly sought-after manager who spent the last couple years in the Texas Rangers coaching staff. Chris Getz comes from a former Kansas City Royals brain trust that has kind of leaked its way into Chicago. And while he does have the worst winning percentage for a general manager of all time, he was kind of thrown into an impossible situation last year. And we'll get into it later, but I do really like some of the trades that he's made, and I think he had a pretty solid offseason considering the state of the White Sox last year. So you can see the 2024 record on the screen there, last in the AL Central, last in the American League, last in all of baseball. They did have a somewhat high payroll in 2024. That's something, as you can see, moving to 2025 has actually been cut by a lot. For some teams, that is not a good thing. You want to spend money to win games. I think in this specific situation, it actually is kind of nice for the White Sox to get off of those contracts and move toward a total rebuild. And as you can see, this year they're projected to be much better. The PECOTA projection system has them with 61 wins in 2025, and I think that would be a really solid step forward for this group. Unfortunately, that same projection system has them with a legitimate 0% chance to make the playoffs. I don't think I'm ever personally that low on a team. I think there's always a little bit of a chance that some baseball magic happens, but if I were a White Sox fan in 2025, I would expect my October to be a lot more filled with Caleb Williams than Luis Robert. The top contracts list is one that you feel pretty good about right now if you're the White Sox. Andrew Benintendi's contract is kind of an interesting one. I'll go over some of his stats later. He actually had a bit of a resurgence in the second half, so maybe he could end up being a trade asset for the White Sox. But Luis Robert Jr. making $15 million, he might be a trade piece. And Andrew Vaughn coming in at the bottom there with $6 million. I think for a team in full rebuild mode, it's kind of nice not to have any big contracts on the shoulders of your owners and any veterans that you really have to overpay for the next few years. You feel much better about giving this new brain trust kind of their own options to spend money in free agency and be able to reallocate that $70 million elsewhere when they really need it later in their rebuild. They last made the playoffs in 2021, and that was a completely different team. New coaches, new management, new players, new everything. It's a brand new era of Chicago White Sox baseball in 2025. And finally, with the organization success, they were solid at the AA and A level last year. Their AAA roster this season, I think, will be pretty solid and one to watch. Also, AA will most likely see Noah Schultz there at the start of the season, maybe some Hagen Smith. So there's some fun minor league teams to watch if you're into that type of stuff. Let's get right into off-season additions and subtractions. And before I get into specific players, I want to note the only players here will be positive WAR players from 2024 or positive projected WAR players in 2025. For those who don't know, WAR stands for wins above replacement. It's a comprehensive statistic that puts together all of your baseball contributions on the field in the season and compares it to what a AAA level player could bring you if he was brought up to the major league level. Not a huge group of additions, but a pretty solid group of vets for the White Sox here. A couple outfielders and Mike Tauchman and Austin Slater brought in on one-year deals, projected to combine for a little over fWAR next year. A couple vet pitchers and Martin Perez and Bryce Wilson. Martin Perez actually slots in as the one starter on this team, as projected by Fangraphs. He might be a trade deadline candidate. Bryce Wilson brought over from Milwaukee. He was solid in their bullpen for the last couple of years and started a few games. He also goes into their rotation. Josh Rojas had a really solid first half last year and kind of fell off in the second half. His numbers landed in an all right spot. For 1 year, $3.5 million, a pretty solid pickup for the White Sox. And then Matt Tice and Cam Boozer both brought in on trades. Tice will be your backup and lefty platoon catcher, and Cam Boozer actually will have a pretty solid role in the Chicago bullpen. For the subtractions, you see the big loss there. Garrett Crochet to the Boston Red Sox. He was far and away their best player, and he actually had more combined WAR than the rest of the team did last year per Fangraphs. Luckily for the White Sox, they did a pretty solid job in bringing back value in this trade for Crochet, a couple top prospects that we'll talk about later, and a couple guys that will help at the Major League level this year. Nicky Lopez had kind of a solid season for the White Sox last year, was never necessarily supposed to be a big player for the team, but he ended with just about 1 WAR in 2024. Michael Soroka came over in a trade with Atlanta a couple years ago. He was solid in the bullpen towards the end of the season. He goes to Washington. And then Yohan Moncada only had 45 plate appearances last year. He was limited with an injury. He goes to Los Angeles, and he'll be their starting third baseman. Going into the minor league deals section, all these guys are going to be invited to spring training. I actually really like this group of guys for the White Sox. I think there's a couple dudes that'll contribute to the team this year. Drury, Dalbec, and Gallo are all bounce-back types that I think will make their way onto the roster this year. Brandon Drury played with the Angels in the past. He's had some pretty solid seasons. Bobby Dalbec was a big prospect coming up through Boston's system and never really made it at the Major League level. And Joey Gallo has been very good in the past. He had 38 home runs for Texas one season. He was the huge prospect. He's got light tower power, but he kind of lost it the past couple of years. After getting traded to the Yankees, he struggled there. He struggled with the Dodgers, struggled with the Twins, struggled with the Nationals. We'll see if the White Sox can get anything out of him this year. Narvaez brought in as a veteran catcher depth option. He had a couple solid seasons with Milwaukee and Seattle in the past. And then the group of pitchers here, I do like James Karinchak as a guy that can come up to the White Sox and be positive this year. Jonathan Heasley and Justin Dunn could also potentially make the roster and are good depth additions for the minor league teams even if they don't make it. Getting into season storylines, I think the biggest one here, last season is behind you, move on to 2025, wipe the vibes off, change the players, change the coaching staff. This is a new season. It's a new way forward for the White Sox and a new era for White Sox baseball. Let's move into 2025. The second storyline is rebuilding, and this is one that the White Sox really haven't fully committed to in the past. Even going into last year, a team that lost 121 games, they still expected to compete in some way in the AL Central last year. Even though they did have 3 teams that won a playoff series last year, going into the season, it wasn't necessarily seen as a great division and one that the White Sox could potentially make the playoffs out of. This will be the first year that they really give their young guys a shot and they really go after a rebuild. I have Jonathan Cannon pictured here. A couple other guys like Brooks Baldwin, Miguel Vargas will all get their shots to shine on this team, and the White Sox will kind of be able to see what they have with their young guys. And then the final storyline I have here is Luis Robert Jr. He's been their guy for the last few seasons. He's the only remnant from that past White Sox team that made the playoffs in 2021, and he's been really solid. He had a tough year last year. He dealt with some injuries. He wasn't the player that he had been in the past, but he's seen winning White Sox baseball, and he's a completely different player than many of the guys on this roster. He's been in trade talks for around 3 seasons now, and the White Sox kind of have to decide when they want to make a move on him. It's more of a when than an if at this point. Depending on the output he gives your team, he could give you a lot of value at the trade deadline. The type of start that Luis Robert Jr. gets off to this year could be really important in this upcoming White Sox rebuild. Getting into the Fangraphs projected lineup and bench, I'll go over a couple of the statistics that I have here on the screen. That WOBA number in the middle there is going to be weighted on base average. Think about WOBA as on base percentage, but every single thing that you do at the plate is weighted differently. So a homer has a higher weight than a triple, that has a higher weight than a double, etc. League average for that stat is 310, and a rule of thumb for it, if it would be a good on base percentage, it would be a good WOBA. If it would be a bad on base percentage, it would be a bad WOBA. Kind of think about it that way. And then weighted runs created plus is the other number that I have on here you might not be familiar with. There's a lot of intricacies to it, but just think of it as an overall measure of offensive production. A rule of thumb for this stat is that 100 is going to be league average, and every number that you see in baseball with a plus at the end of it, 100 is always going to be league average. The number above or below it that you are is going to be the percent better or worse that you are compared to league average. For example, Mike Tauchman is projected 110 weighted runs created plus next year. That means he's projected to be a 10% better hitter than league average. And taking a look at this major league lineup, there's only 5 guys that are projected to be better offensively than league average next year. Tauchman, Robert Jr., Benintendi, Vaughn, and Vargas are all projected above that 100 number, while the rest of the guys on this list are projected below it. A couple things that I want to take away from this lineup. One thing you'll really see looking at these numbers, there's not a lot of power here. That is not a positive of this White Sox team as it's currently constructed. Luis Robert projected 28 home runs and Vaughn projected 23. I think you feel really good if you get those numbers from those 2 players. Alongside that, Vargas, Vaughn, Benintendi, Baldwin, and Robert are all expected to take steps up compared to what they did offensively last year. That just goes to show you how tough of a season it was for the White Sox last year. While I wouldn't constitute these numbers that you see on the screen as very good, I think it just shows how much of a step forward this team can take if they actually get the numbers that they should be getting. The last 2 things I'll say before I move on, there's definitely a few below average hitters here. A couple of them are going to give you positive defensive value, so they make up their WAR in other ways. But it's hard to sit here and tell you that this is a great lineup because there's definitely some holes in it. We got the guys listed on the bench here. In parentheses is their projected WAR for the 2025 season. Not a lot there. Drury, Slater, Tice. I'm expecting a little bit out of them. Slater's going to get most of his run against left-handed pitchers because that's where he really thrives. Tice should get most of his run against righties. And that'll bring us into the projected rotation. We got 3 rookies here. This is just the start at 5 projected by Fangraphs. There's a couple other guys in Drew Thorpe and Kai Bush that gave them innings last year. I'll go over them specifically in the prospect section of this video. They definitely could earn the 5th or 4th starter spots out of spring training, but I'm just rolling with what Fangraphs has projected for this rotation. This is pretty far and away the highest projected ERA for a rotation that I've seen in this entire series. Not a lot of strikeouts here. Also not a lot of walks. But for a team that finished 30th in defense at the major league level last year, I wouldn't necessarily say that that's a great thing either. You're getting a lot of balls in play. I would expect the defense to take a step forward this year. There's some guys that didn't get full run at the major league level and some guys that didn't really play to their level last year, but that could be something to monitor going forward. Perez and Wilson are your free agent acquisition veterans that are brought in to help this rotation. I would expect one, if not both of them, to be moved at the deadline for this team. As one-year deals, they don't fit their long-term plan, and if either of them gets off to a hot start and the White Sox see a place where they can recoup some value, I think they would definitely try to do that. I don't hate the 3 rookies that we have here. I do like Jonathan Cannon a lot. His projected numbers are not great. I think I personally would have him projected a little higher with the strikeout rate, the ERA a little lower. The Fangraphs projections are historically pretty conservative for these numbers. I would think that Cannon, Martin, and Burke would be closer to league average ERA than the ones that they have listed, but they also don't have much major league experience, and that could hurt them a little bit over the long run. You'll notice the innings pitched here, not very high for a lot of these guys. As I mentioned, Thorpe and Bush are also projected to give you some innings. There's some guys in the minors that we'll go over later that will come up this year, I assume, and give the White Sox more innings there. This is just not a great rotation. You would like to see some of these guys take a step forward. I think there's definitely a good shot that that happens. I think Cannon, out of all of these guys, maybe Martin as well, could take a pretty big jump forward in 2025. But as Fangraphs has them projected, just not great. We'll get into the bullpen here, and this is actually one of the younger bullpens that I've ever seen in my entire life. We got Justin Anderson as really the only older guy here. He was pretty solid for the White Sox last year. Projected a 4.38 ERA as their closer currently. If I had to guess, I would say Ellard or Baroa would take over that role after a bit. I think Justin Anderson is definitely a potential trade candidate for a playoff contending team this year. Ellard, Baroa, and Boozer, I think, are your long-term guys here. One to look out for in this bullpen is Shane Smith, formerly of the Milwaukee Brewers organization. He was a Rule 5 draft pick. meaning that he has to stay on the team the entire season at the major league level or he gets returned to Milwaukee. His minor league numbers are pretty outrageous. We'll go over them in the bullpen section of this. I think he's going to be pretty solid for the White Sox and a good pitcher at the major league level. Other than that, a couple names that I like here: Baroa, Ellard, Boozer should all be pretty solid. Schuster gave you some innings last year for the White Sox. Gilbert was also brought in. I think a pretty high variance bullpen thrown out there for the White Sox this year. Nobody with a really great projected ERA. A lot of the guys have high walk rates, but there's some high strikeout rates here, and I think there's some things to look forward to. I'll get into the individual player breakdowns, and while I move into this screen, I want to go over a couple numbers before I dive into all of it. I'll be showing you the baseball savant pages of every single player, and then the percentiles that I have here are going to be their percentile in run value in offense, defense, and base running from the 2024 season. I'll give you the splits against both right-handed and left-handed pitchers, and then on the baseball savant page, any of your X stats are going to be expected. So expected WOBA, expected batting average, expected slugging. The thing with those that's so beneficial is that over a large sample size, we tend to see those numbers really mirror the actual numbers from the players. So if you see a player on here who has an expected batting average that's much higher than the batting average that he had last season, you would expect his batting average to go up if he gives you what he gave you last year offensively. So I'll get into this White Sox catching group here. This is probably the worst group in all of baseball. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Corey Lee, per 162, is one of the least valuable players that I've seen in this entire series. Nothing against him. I mean, just not a great hitter. He's not great against either side. Second percentile in offense run value last year. He's really good at throwing out runners. I will give him that. His pop time and caught stealing above average is in the top 10th percentile in baseball. He was pretty even against righties and lefties last year. He was pretty even first to second half last year. He's just kind of the same hitter everywhere. 64 weighted runs created plus last year. He's projected to be a little better this year, so that could take a step forward. He's 26. He's had some run at the major league level. I think this is definitely a place where they need an upgrade. He does have some pop. He was a former prospect with the Astros, got traded over to the White Sox. He had 12 home runs last year. 66 percentile in base running runs is pretty decent for a catcher, so he has that going for him as well. I really tried my best to dig and find some good Corey Lee hitting stats. There really wasn't a lot. 30% whiff rate on fastballs, over 45 on off-speed and breaking. Just not a great hitter. Hopefully he can take a step forward this year, but you kind of can see what you're getting out of him. We'll move over to Matt Tice. He was a veteran acquisition brought in this offseason to trade with the Cubs. He's the better hitter out of these two, though not much better. He can hit righties pretty well. I would say he's the better defensive catcher, though he doesn't have the arm that Corey Lee has. The NQ on the screen for him, he didn't have enough plate appearances to qualify for any of the run value section last year. Pre-All-Star last season, he had a 725 OPS, post-All-Star a 539, so he had a bit of a fall off in the second half. He's been a pretty solid fastball hitter in terms of expected WOBA, though his whiff rates in recent years have been in the high 30s. These are two guys that swing and miss a lot, so you're not going to get a lot from this group here offensively. Defensively, they're below average as well. The best thing about this group is it's open for the kids to take a spot. Edgar Caro and Kyle Teal are two very good catchers that are coming up through their system. I would expect one of them to snatch the spot this year, and the other one will most likely come up and be a first base DH type. Both pretty solid prospects that can help the White Sox in 2025 and moving forward. So Andrew Vaughn is a former number 3 overall pick for the Chicago White Sox in the 2019 draft. He's been kind of floating between first base, DH, and corner outfield in recent seasons. I think the best thing about him is his availability. He's given you 555, 615, and 619 plate appearances in the last 3 years. He's been about league average or a little better the 2 seasons before 2024. Took a bit of a step back in 2024, but there are still some good stats here on Baseball Savant that kind of liked his season, even though he didn't get the results. He hasn't been the most valuable player. You see -1 WAR per 162 since 2022, but I think a lot of that has to do with how tough he is as a defender in the outfield. They were kind of throwing him in an impossible situation last year. He really found his home at first base, and I think that's where he should be all the time. He's got pop in his bat, 19 home runs last year, little below league average. I think he takes a step forward this season. As you can see, he's actually a very solid hitter against lefties. He takes a bit of a step back against righties in 2024, but over the past 2 seasons before that, it was actually the opposite. So he had been a better hitter against righties in 2023 and 22, but he changed that. He was a lefty hitter mostly last year. He had a couple pretty solid months last year and a couple kind of tough months. He had a really rough April and July, both under 600 OPS, that really brought down his season stats, but he finished off the season really well. His August and September, 705 and 813 OPS in those 2 months. Pre-All-Star 685, post-All-Star 719, so he took a bit of a step forward in the second half. In 2024, he was really solid as the second hitter in the lineup. I would like to see that maybe come back at some point, although not to start off the season. And I think the biggest thing for him in 2024 was that he regressed heavily on fastballs. 2024, a -4 run value on four-seam fastballs only. In 2023, it was a +5 run value. So that's a huge difference. That's the pitch that you're going to see the most throughout the season. If he can kind of get back to normal with that, I think he could really have a solid year. And it would be nice to have him as an option moving forward and figure out that this can be a piece of the future Chicago White Sox teams. Getting to second base, we have Lenyn Sosa. He had a 100-game sample last year, and I think he underperformed his expected stats by a pretty decent margin. His expected batting average was just outside the top 10th percentile in baseball, and he only hit .254. He had an 80 weighted runs created plus, so he's 20% below average. I think he's a better hitter than that. He's only 25 years old. He's gotten some run at the major league level. I think this could kind of be not a breakout year, but a breakthrough year for Lenyn Sosa. At second base, he doesn't bring you much defensively, and he hasn't been a great base runner, so he's not going to bring you a ton of value. You see that -0.8 WAR per 162, but I think offensively, he's got a profile. He doesn't walk a lot, which is kind of tough. He does strike out a decent amount, but he doesn't really whiff at pitches. He knows where to hit the ball, that launch angle sweet spot percent, 99th percentile, and his numbers in expected batting average, expected slugging, and his hard hit and squared up percentage can kind of get you excited for what his offensive profile could look like in 2025. He was another guy kind of like Andrew Vaughn, where he had a couple bad months really bring down his entire season. His April, a 338 OPS, and his August, a 379 OPS. Outside of that, he had a couple months where he was around a league average hitter, and I think that's the hitter that we could expect him to be in 2025. He's also a guy that hit lefties really well last season. His expected numbers on the four-seam fastball are much better than the actual numbers he got last year. That's where I expect him to make a big jump in 2025 and kind of give you a lot more of a contribution offensively. Though he doesn't have the greatest ceiling ever because of the low walk rate, I think he can still be a solid second baseman for you. And while he's not going to bring in a ton of value because he kind of struggles in some other areas like defense and base running, I think he could be a nice player. He gives you some utility value. He played third base in the past, and he could be one of the bright spots on this roster. At 25 years old, there's a lot of baseball left for Lenyn Sosa. Going over to third base, we have another veteran piece brought in for the White Sox and a great defender at third base in Josh Rojas. He's a guy that can bring you a lot of value just because of that fielding on its own. 94th percentile in range last year, and while he didn't have the strongest arm, he had the range to make a lot of plays at third that a lot of people wouldn't be able to make. 85th percentile in defense run value in 2024. He played 143 games last year, 8 home runs, 10 stolen bases, a little below league average offensively, but if he can bring you what he gave you defensively last year, he's one of these guys that I like to call a floor raiser. Somebody that raises the floor of your baseball team just because of what they can bring in one area. The biggest thing with Rojas is last season, he really only saw right-handed hitters. 67 plate appearances against lefties and 409 against righties. He got off to a pretty torrid start last year. 931 OPS in April, a 1 dot in 8 at-bats in March, and then he kind of fell off after that. Nothing above a 654 OPS in any month for the rest of the season in 2024. Pre-All-Star, 680 OPS, post-All-Star, 574 OPS. I would like to see Josh Rojas given full run at third base this year. He could potentially become a trade candidate, and I think he would be a wanted one, specifically with how good he is defensively at third base. But this is definitely what I would consider a high floor addition for the White Sox. You're bringing in someone that's very good defensively, okay base running. He's not going to give you a ton offensively. You would like to see him give you more against lefties. 6th percentile in batting run value in 2024 with a -15. But you could afford to throw him out there every single day because he's going to bring you positive value. Moving over to shortstop, we got Brooks Baldwin, and this is a really interesting one. A switch hitter, a 24-year-old player, half a WAR per 162. He was just called up last year and saw 33 games of action in 2024. 58 weighted runs created plus. The numbers don't love him offensively, but he's an interesting player because he can field his position and he's very, very fast. He really struggled when he came up to the majors, a 489 OPS and 42 plate appearances in July, but actually took a step forward in August. 632 OPS, while it's not great, that's a pretty big step for a first-year player at the major league level. While batting 8th for the White Sox last year, he had a 750 OPS, so I think that could be a spot for him this year. I like him lower in the lineup to give you a speed and defense option at shortstop while we wait on some of the guys coming through the system. I'll mention in 2024, he had really good minor league numbers. An 870 OPS, 375 on base, 459 slugging in 2024 in AA and AAA. He actually only got 8 games of run at AAA because he was doing so good there, a 1.096 OPS. He had 8 home runs last season in 82 games there. He had 15 and 93 in 2023, so there is some pop in his bat. I kind of like Brooks Baldwin as a player that can give you value in 2025. We'll see what he does offensively. He's obviously not even close to a finished product. He's just getting up to the majors for the first time, but I think there's something there. Maybe not your long-term shortstop, but somebody that has an outside shot of getting it just because of what he can do as a defender and a runner. I like Brooks Baldwin as a breakout player in 2025, and one that I'm going to be checking the box scores of every single game. So we move on to left field and Andrew Benintendi. He's got the biggest contract on this team. He's one of the only veterans that's left here. And for someone who played as many games as he did in 2024, he might be the biggest pre-All-Star to post-All-Star gainer in stats in the entire league. A 569 OPS alongside a 258 on base percentage in the first half. Second half, 328 on base percentage, 502 slug for an 830 OPS. So he got much, much better as the season went on. A 952 OPS in August, an 807 in September. You really like to see that for Andrew Benintendi. Another thing for him, he really settled into the third spot last year. 161 plate appearances there, 868 OPS for the White Sox in 2024 as the third hitter. He gives you a little more against righties than lefties as a lefty bat. And in last season, he was more of a contact bat than anything. He's shown that he has power in the past, specifically some of his seasons with the White Sox, but as he's grown older, he's kind of developed into a contact hitter. And that's something that is very nice for the White Sox to have. As you can see on his page, he doesn't chase much, he doesn't whiff much, he doesn't strike out much. He doesn't have a very fast bat. He's not a guy that'll give you a lot defensively. He doesn't give you a lot on the bases as well, but the way he played in the second half, if you can get a full season out of that for Benintendi, he turns into a much more valuable player for your organization. 20 home runs in the 135 games in 2024 as well. 13 of those home runs coming in just 235 plate appearances in the second half. So I would really like to see that second half Benintendi show up, and if we get that, that is a huge positive for the White Sox. It's a complete X factor for this season. Now in center field, we have Luis Robert Jr. He's 27 years old, 3.6 WAR per 162. So he's a very valuable player, very good range in the outfield. His arm value, not as good as it has been in the past. Sprint speed is still up there for a player who's 27 years old. In 100 games last year, he didn't give out a very good sample. And compared to the samples that he's given in the past, a huge step back for Luis Robert. So I'm going to do a little exercise here. I want you to look at some of the numbers on the screen, and then I'll go over his numbers in 2023. 2023, 315 on base, 542 slug for an 857 OPS. He was 76th percentile in xWOBA, 91st in expected slug, 93rd in barrel rate, 94th in bat speed, 86th in launch angle sweet spot. He's never been very good with the whiff, chase, strikeout, or walk rates. He was also 98th percentile in range last year and 64th in arm value. He had 38 home runs in 2023, and yes, he did have 170 more plate appearances, so we might see those numbers start to come back as he gets rid of the injuries that he had in 2024, but just a large step back in 2023. I think the player that was there in 2023 is definitely still there. You just kind of want to wash 2024 out and get Luis Robert on the field and producing as much as he can. Last thing I'll mention on Luis Robert, in 100 games last year, he had 0.5 WAR, in 145 in 2023, 4.9. The Fangraphs does an offense number that's very similar to the run value number at Baseball Savant. In 2023, 20.2. In 2024, negative 6.8. So he was a negative offensive player in 2024. I think it's still there for him. In 2025, he's projected 3 WAR, and I think we see him get much closer to 3 WAR than the 0.5 that we got from him last year. As I mentioned earlier, this is a huge pivot year for Robert. He could end up getting a ton in trade value, or if he has another season like he did in 2024, though he'll still get a lot because of his past pedigree, he won't get near as much in return for the White Sox. I really do think if Luis Robert gets off to a strong start this year, we see the White Sox move off of him very quickly. Teams know what they can expect from him, and the White Sox are going to try to pounce on that as quickly as possible. When he's right, Luis Robert's one of the most fun players to watch. Last season was a step back. I really hope we get the fun version of Luis Robert back. The White Sox have enjoyed having him on their roster for the past few years. We'll see the value that he brings the White Sox in terms of his value or the prospects that they get back in a package to keep pushing that rebuild forward in 2025. Getting to right field, we have another one of our offseason additions and actually a pretty fun player in Mike Tauchman. I really like this pickup for the White Sox. 1.8 WAR per 162 since 22, so another player that brings you a lot of value. 111 weighted runs created plus in 2024. So he was 11% better than average, although he only played in 109 games. We'll get into some of those numbers. 7 home runs and 6 stolen bases. He got on base at a 357 clip. That's really valuable for the White Sox to have at the top of this lineup. In 2024, he had 281 plate appearances against righties and 69 against lefties. The interesting thing about it is he actually wasn't much worse against lefties than righties. I think the White Sox are kind of going to give him full run right away in 2025. Prove that he's a solid player, and this could be another one of the guys that picks up value for the White Sox in terms of prospect capital. He walks a lot. You see that on the screen, 98th percentile in walk rate. He doesn't chase very often, and his expected WOBA number is actually very good. He doesn't bring you a lot of value defensively, but his value is in getting on base and being a setup guy for a couple of the other hitters that are going to be in this lineup. He got off to a great start in 2024. 959 OPS in the month of April, 425 on base percentage. Pre-All-Star, he was 741 OPS, 359 on base. Post-All-Star, his on-base numbers stayed pretty similar at 351, but his slugging dropped a pretty solid amount, 672 OPS in the second half for Tauchman. As the leadoff hitter for the Chicago Cubs in 2024, 379 on base in those at-bats, 411 on base when he was batting second for the Chicago Cubs. It's a really interesting way for the White Sox to bring in value in a guy that can get on base to this extent. He's 34 years old. He's on a 1-year deal. I would expect the White Sox to move off of him at some point, but for the start of the season, it's a really good lineup setter for guys like Andrew Vaughn, Andrew Benintendi, and Luis Robert that are going to need guys on base to score runs for this organization. Finally, we'll get into DH, and I think really the biggest pivot point for this team is Miguel Vargas. He was brought in at the deadline in 2024 in a trade with the Dodgers. He had 304 plate appearances in 2023 with the Dodgers. There were some Savant numbers that liked him a lot. His chase rate, whiff rate, and K rate were all very low. His walk rate was pretty high. So there's a profile building there for Miguel Vargas. And he got off to a much better start with the Dodgers in 2024. A 736 OPS in 80 plate appearances in 30 games for them. After he came over to Chicago, he really struggled. A 217 on base, 170 slug, 104 average, 387 OPS in 157 plate appearances for the White Sox. You can attribute that to a lot of things. Him being a young player in not a great lineup, kind of the 2024 White Sox being all over it, but there just wasn't much going well for Vargas in 2024. Pretty much every single number came down for him as he came to the Chicago White Sox. He didn't hit either side very well. Both the peripheral and actual numbers for Vargas really went down, and he was a negative value player in 2024. Negative 1.3 WAR per 162, although he was exactly 0.0 in wins above replacement, he was negative 1.0 in 2024. As of recently, Will Venable has came out and said that Miguel Vargas should be the primary option at third base this year. I would really like to see Josh Rojas get some run out there, and as I mentioned for him, get that defensive value where you can. I think Vargas for now is better suited at DH. He can play outfield, he can play the infield, he can do a lot of things. I'm really interested to see what he does. But personally, I liked him a lot as a prospect. His minor league numbers are much better than what he's given at the major league level. The biggest thing that stands out for me, last year in AAA, even though he was struggling at the major league level, 151 weighted runs created plus and a 436 WOBA in AAA. He walked 20% of the time and only struck out 17% of the time in AAA for them last year. 8 home runs in 24 games. So it's there. He's done it before. He's had a 23 home run season in the minors before. He's been a prospect. He's been a guy that has somewhat contributed at the major league level. The White Sox saw a lot in him when they acquired him at the deadline. He was the biggest piece in trading 2 of their bigger players to acquire him. What future that Vargas has with the White Sox is going to be really interesting. If he's able to turn it around and put up some better numbers at the major league level, this could work out really well for them. If we get what we got from him in 2024, he won't get much run at the major league level. That being said, I think with this team in 2025, Miguel Vargas should have all the leeway to learn and fail at the major league level. That I really do like. I like when prospects are kind of given the green light to go out there and just play and learn as much as they can at the major league level. I would like to see Vargas grow as much as possible, and I'm hoping for a bounce back 2025 for him. So going into the projected bench, we have Brandon Drury, Nick Maton, and Austin Slater. Drury and Slater have actually been pretty valuable players at the major league level. Drury had a very solid season 2 years ago, but really struggled in 2024. White Sox are hoping to get some of that bounce back from him. He can kind of play wherever in the infield that you need him. So for a guy that can hit and not be expected to do a ton offensively right away, that's a solid bench piece for the White Sox. Nick Maton didn't get much run at the major league level. He's been up before. 118 weighted runs created plus in 2024. These are going to be his AAA stats. 16 home runs in 91 games. He can play. He can hit. He's been kind of bouncing back and forth between a couple teams. He's your lefty option right away on the bench. I would almost expect a guy like Joey Gallo or maybe Bobby Dalbec to make the roster over Nick Maton, but I do like his AAA numbers. There's something there with him. He can be a positive on the team, and he can play anywhere. Austin Slater will likely get run against lefties every single time there's one out there. He took a pretty big step back against them in 2024, but in 147 plate appearances in 2023, in 800 OPS against left-handed pitchers. He did get a major league deal, so expect him to be on the roster for most of the season. This is one of the lighter benches out of all the major league teams as well. I'd like to say that. There are pieces here that can be positive, but I think we'll more than likely see a lot of minor league guys come up throughout the year kind of to replace these guys. Slater will be up, as I mentioned, but I think we'll see an influx of players in these bench spots. So the current number 1 projected starting pitcher for this White Sox team is Martin Perez. Taking a look at the Baseball Savant page, you don't really like what he gave you in 2024. He had an incredible 2022 season. 32 starts to a 2.89 ERA, 169 strikeouts in 196 innings. That's very, very solid. In 2024, 135 innings, a 4.53 ERA at a 4.90 FIP, so a pretty big step back from that 2022 season. We see FIP as a predictor to ERA, so kind of like the Baseball Savant stats, we would expect the FIP and ERA to get closer as there's a bigger sample through the season. So he actually overperformed his FIP by a pretty significant margin last year. I'll mention on the screen, the run values on the right side are going to be your overall pitching run value, your fastball run value, breaking pitch run value, and off-speed run value. He wasn't a positive in really any of them in 2024. The biggest thing for Martin Perez, in 2022, his fastball run value was 99th percentile. His sinker has been very good in the past. His cutter has been very good in the past. In 2024, he just wasn't that pitcher. The WOBA against his cutter in 2024 took a jump of over 130 points. So that is really what got him in 2024. He wasn't able to set up his secondary pitches with a positive fastball, and that really led to him being hit hard. When he's at his best, he's able to get pitches hit into the ground. Last year, while he was okay at that 58th percentile on his Baseball Savant page, he was much better in the past. He's been steadily declining at a lot of these areas. Expected ERA, expected batting average, barrel rate, hard hit rate, ground ball rate. Really everything on the Baseball Savant page he's been declining in the past few seasons. He is 33 years old. He has a lot of innings on his arm, 1,575.2 total innings in the majors. But he is a solid veteran to have in this rotation, a guy that can give you innings at the start of the year while you wait on some of your guys to come through the system. And if he gets off to a solid start, maybe the way that he did in 2022 or 2023, he could be a trade acquisition for some contending team. He did get much better as the season went on, a 5.15 ERA in the first half and a 3.79 in the second half. He started off the season with the Pirates, ended up going to the Padres, so maybe there's a little team stuff going on there. Padres have a great team defense compared to the Pirates. He's a ground ball pitcher that could help him. The White Sox defense, unfortunately, is not great. He's not going to be pitching to his strengths with this defense. I'm a little worried about it. I will say, post-All-Star, August, 3.41 ERA, 3.54 in September, so he's been good. He has been a good pitcher in the past. You just don't really know what you're going to get out of Martin Perez outside of a lot of innings, which could be a positive for this team regardless. So moving on, we're going to get into a really interesting group of 3 rookie pitchers that got some run for the White Sox at the Major League level last year, and we'll start with Jonathan Cannon. 2021 starts in 2024, 124.1 innings. He's a 5-pitch guy, 5 pitches over 12%, and not one that he really leans on. Sinker and sweeper combined for about 40%, the rest of his pitches to 60%. More than anything, Jonathan Cannon's a guy that limits hard contact. You see him 70th percentile in hard hit rate. He doesn't get a ton of strikeouts. I would like to see him work on limiting walks, but alongside that, he hasn't had run at the Major League level before. He was a 3rd-round pick in 2022, so he's made his way through the system pretty fast. He was very good at high A in 2023, and got all of his run outside of the majors at AAA in 2024, where he did kind of struggle, a 5.50 ERA over 37.2 innings. He does allow balls to be hit in the air to a pretty decent extent. That's kind of the reasoning for his expected ERA, expected batting average being so high. He has a solid fastball, not a great fastball, and breaking and off-speed pitches that haven't really taken that step forward at the Major League level. I think that's where Jonathan Cannon kind of locks in and figures out how to become a better pitcher at the Major League level, is when he really unlocks that breaking and off-speed pitch in his arsenal. He needs something to go along with that fastball to help him limit hard contact. Just at 24 years old, the White Sox are really letting him figure it out at the Major League level, which is a really good sign for him. Alongside Miguel Vargas, he's another one of these young guys that they're really just throwing out there and saying, hey, show us what you got. And that's perfect for this season for the White Sox. We'll get into Davis Martin here, and he's an older rookie. He came up in 2022 with the White Sox, 14 games, 9 starts. 14th round pick in 2018, so he's been in the system for a while. He's 28 years old, and he kind of had a pretty solid run at the Major League level last year. Kind of an interesting one because he never really had great success at the minor league level. 5.14 ERA in 2022, 4.91 in 2021. But the White Sox kind of realized that this is a pitcher that could have success when he gets brought up, and he did to an extent last year. Pretty similar to Cannon, he's not a guy that gets a lot of strikeouts. His walk rate is pretty high, but he limits hard contact, and better than Cannon, he gets the ball on the ground. 75th percentile in ground ball percent, 75th percentile in average exit velocity as well. His expected ERA is actually much lower than his actual ERA last season, so I think we'll see him kind of make that step forward and become a better pitcher. The thing with him, that's also the thing with Cannon, is his other pitches just aren't great. His fastball wasn't necessarily good last year. His off-speed pitches also had a negative run value. His changeup was even in run value. So he needs to develop his other pitches more to play alongside his best pitches and give him as much of an opportunity to extend his lifeline as a starter as possible. So not a super high ceiling guy, as he's already 28 years old. He just made his first real big sample of Major League run in 2024. But he's a guy that can go out there and give you innings. And if he can give you that expected ERA number over a full season, that is highly valuable to the White Sox. So we'll get into Sean Burke, and he's the first real high ceiling guy that I see in this rotation. And he's a really interesting player. Being completely honest with you, I'd never heard this name before I did this White Sox deep dive. He was a 3rd-round pick in 2021 out of the University of Maryland, 1.42 ERA in 4 games, 3 starts last year. Not a huge sample. I'm not going to sit here and take a ton away from it, but some of the numbers really liked him. His K rate was really high. He was getting whiffs on his pitches, and he had a +5 pitching run value in 2024, a +3 on his fastball, and a +2 on his breaking. So he was positive in really every area when he got out there in his limited action last year. He did overperform his expected stats by a bit. His WOBA was 258 against, expected WOBA against 303. So there is a bit of a regression to the mean to be seen if he's giving you what he gave us. But I do like the ceiling for him. Similar to Martin, another guy that didn't really have success at the minor league level. The thing with him is he did have a lot of strikeouts, and that's a really good thing. If he doesn't end up being a starter, if Thorpe or Bush ends up taking his spot in the long-term rotation, I think he's a solid reliever as well. 103 strikeouts in 71 innings in the minors last year, 137 and 108 in 2022. He's got a solid pitch mix, and I think he could get run at either starter or reliever. I would like to see the White Sox give him run as a starter next year and kind of see what you have. As a rebuilding team, you kind of got to find your options at starter in interesting ways sometimes, and Sean Burke could be the next example of that for a White Sox team that's rebuilding. And finally, we'll get into Bryce Wilson. He's the listed 5th starter on Fangraphs. For most of the season with Milwaukee, in the last 2 years actually, he's been more of a bulk guy out of the bullpen. He started 9 games with the Brewers in 2024. In 2023, 0 starts, a 2.58 ERA with the Brewers that year. The biggest thing about Wilson, the past 2 years, his fastball has been great. His other pitches really haven't been there, and that's kind of the reason last year that he took a step back. He doesn't walk a lot of guys, he doesn't strike out a lot of guys. In 2023, he was really good at limiting barrels and hard hit, but in 2024, again, he took a step back in that area. Still, pretty solid numbers. A 4.04 ERA adding to this pitching staff is pretty good. I think even if he isn't your 5th starter right away, he is a guy that can give you a lot of innings out of the bullpen, really valuable for this team. Just wanted to mention also he's a former top prospect with the Braves, traded a couple times, ended up with Pittsburgh and Milwaukee, so he's kind of a fun story to follow. I enjoyed watching Bryce Wilson pitch last year, kind of fun to have in the bullpen. And if nothing, a solid veteran addition that can give you innings for the White Sox this year. So let's get into the high leverage relievers listed by Fangraphs, and the group here is Anderson, Ellard, and Baroa, 2 younger guys, and Anderson really being the only older one in this pen. Anderson was not in that closer role really at all last year. He only had 1 save, a 4.39 ERA, so he was all right. If he's your closer, he's your Fernando Rodney type. He's going to make you sweat through every single outing, but he's got some pretty nice stuff. 2nd percentile in walk rate, 13.6% last year, 23.5% strikeout. So even though he does have a high walk rate, he's not striking out a ton of guys. High in whiff percent, chase percent, average exit velocity is 86th percentile as well. 78th percentile hard hit. Some numbers really like him, some numbers really don't, and the ones that really don't outweigh the rest of his profile. Ellard is going to be more of your crafty lefty type. He doesn't throw super hard, 95 about on the average fastball, strikes out 25% of the guys he faces. Barrel rate was pretty solid last year, only 6.5%. 70% of the time with him, the ball's either going in the catcher's mitt or on the ground. He did struggle at generating chases, and his average exit velocity was 90.1 last year, so that puts him in the poor range. Very good breaking pitches. I think he's more of your 8th inning guy than anything. If there's a guy that you want to be the closer in this White Sox bullpen, it's Prelander Baroa. 24 years old, absolute flamethrower, 96th percentile in fastball velo last year. He was 100th percentile in expected batting average, hard hit rate, and average exit velocity. He's a stud. 2.26 expected ERA, so actually much lower than what he gave you last year, and he really gave you a small sample. The thing with him as well, though, he walks almost 16% of the batters that he faces. If he can get the control down, he is nasty. He could be your closer for the next 7 years. Came over in a trade with Seattle a couple of years ago. He was a prospect. Moving him into the bullpen, I think, is probably the best thing you could have done with him. I think this dude is a stud and somebody that you need to know. Let's get into the rest of the bullpen here. Gus Varland has a very solid fastball. He was pretty decent last year, only 26 innings. He limits barrels really well, doesn't walk a lot of guys, but not a huge strikeout guy for a reliever. Cam Boozer, last year just getting his first major league run with the Red Sox at 32 years old. Really good lefty. 3.38 ERA in 42 innings. His chase rate is in the top 5th percentile in baseball. Expected ERA is really good. He limits hard contact. Doesn't strike out a lot of guys as well. walks a little more than Varland does, but he gets whiffs. He has some pretty good pitches. I think he'll be solid for the White Sox. Jared Schuster has some former prospect pedigree. He was drafted in the first round by the Braves in 2020. 94th percentile in hard hit rate last year. He doesn't give up a lot of hard hit balls, doesn't strike out a lot of guys, walks a decent amount, doesn't have any great pitches, but he can give you a lot of innings out of the bullpen. 73.1 last year for the White Sox. Tyler Gilbert, former starter turned reliever, doesn't walk a lot of guys, doesn't give up a lot of barrels. His numbers kind of lied to you last year. 5.82 expected ERA, a 3.24 ERA. So we'll see what we get from him. Only 8 innings last year. He's thrown a no-hitter before as a starter with the Diamondbacks. I thought I'd throw that in there. He's been around for a while, another vet that they added to this team. And then finally, Shane Smith. I mentioned a Rule 5 guy from Milwaukee earlier. He was a reliever coming in. He wasn't drafted. They turned him into a starter last season in Milwaukee. 32 games, 16 starts, 94.1 innings, 113 strikeouts. He's a dog, man. He's got some very good pitches. He's going to be really fun to watch for the White Sox this year. Selfishly, as someone who watches the Brewers, I really hope he sucks and he gets returned next year, but I think he could be very good for them. In 2023 as a reliever, 196 ERA and 59.2 innings out of the bullpen, and he saved a couple games as well. We'll see how he does this year. I'm really interested to see how those numbers test out. Also to mention with those strikeouts in 2024, 113 strikeouts, only 29 walks. So he can control his pitches really well. He has very good minor league numbers, and I could see him contributing to the White Sox this year. And we'll move on into top prospects now. This is a really solid crop of White Sox prospects. 3 guys listed here as the top guys are in the top 100. Noah Schultz, even a top 10 prospect in all of baseball. Before I dive in, I want to say that all these tools are going to be on a 20 to 80 grading scale. I'll have the Baseball America grade there in the middle listed as future value on here. And all of these rankings are going to be straight from Baseball America. So we'll go into Noah Schultz. He has been incredible in the minors for the White Sox. 26th pick out of high school in Illinois for the White Sox. 6'9", 220 lefty. Career 2.03 ERA in the minors. Last season in high A and double A, 88.1 innings, 115 strikeouts, and 24 walks. The really cool thing about him, he moved up to double A last year. In double A, 1.48 ERA, 73 Ks, and 17 walks in 61 innings. So he's only getting better as he moves up the farm system. He's one of my favorite guys to watch in all of baseball. I don't think we'll see him in 2025 because he's still very young, 21 years old, coming up, hasn't thrown a lot of innings in the minors, but he's a guy to watch out for. He could be a Chris Sale-like. I'm not going to say that I'm the one that said it. I've heard it before. A Randy Johnson-like pitcher. I do love the comparison, though. I hope Schultz ends up being that good. He's one of these guys that you can get yourself just so excited for. Looking at the minor league numbers, I would advise you, if you're a White Sox fan or any baseball fan at all, just go to YouTube, look up Noah Schultz, watch him pitch one time. He's so fun to watch. So Colson Montgomery is your number 2 prospect here. He's a shortstop. He had been very good in the past before 2024, took a pretty big step back at the AAA level, though he was there all season. 18 home runs in 130 games in 2024. In 23, 64 games across 3 levels, a 939 OPS, 8 home runs in those 64 games, 56 strikeouts to 56 walks. The biggest difference from last year to this year, 164 strikeouts to 69 walks in AAA. So while he did take a step back with the numbers, I do still think the White Sox see him as their shortstop of the future. People have said he could potentially move off the position to third. We'll see how it goes. I think he's probably on a similar level compared to Brooks Baldwin defensively. I think they would rather give Montgomery the shot just because he has this prospect pedigree. He was the 22nd pick in the 2021 draft, so he's been around a while. Another one of these guys drafted out of high school, and I would definitely expect to see him at the major league level this year. I wouldn't say he's going to break spring training with the team, but I think he'll be up sooner than later, depending on how his start goes at AAA. And then as the third prospect for the White Sox, we got a really fast riser, the number 5 overall pick in the 2024 MLB draft. A great college pitcher at Arkansas. He's already 21 years old. He was in high A for 3 starts last year. Pretty solid, 7.2 innings, 7 strikeouts, 3.52 ERA. As of right now, he's more of a two-pitch pitcher than anything. Both his fastball and slider are very good. If he really works on getting that changeup as a better option, he could see his stock rise up even more and kind of see his ceiling as a number 1 or number 2 starter compared to people seeing him as around a number 3 starter right now just because of the 2 pitches. I really enjoy watching Hagen Smith. If you know anything about college baseball, you've probably seen this guy pitch before. He's a dog, man. I'm pretty excited to see what he does in the minors this year. I would expect him to start at either high A or double A and kind of move his way up, but he's definitely a dude that I could see rising through the system pretty fast. Getting into some of these notable infield prospects now, we got the crown jewel and another piece in the Garrett Crochet trade in this section. Kyle Teel was the 14th overall pick in 2023 out of Virginia, and he's had very good minor league stats to back up that prospect pedigree. 134 weighted runs created plus last season, 376 WOBA, walked 13.5% of the time, all through AA and AAA last season. I would say between these two catchers you see on the screen, he's probably a little better defensively. I would definitely expect to see Teel up at the major league level. There's a really cool video going around on social media right now. He just took Roki Sasaki deep in BP. He's got a great lefty swing, and I'm really interested to see what happens between these two catchers as I get into Edgar Caro here. He's one of these guys that the White Sox have moved through their system really quickly. At just 21 years old, he's already in AAA. He's on the 40-man roster, 139 weighted runs created plus last year. He doesn't walk as much as Teel does, but he doesn't strike out as much. 9.7 on the walk, 17.4 on the strikeout. He's got on base at a great level his entire minor league career. Every single stop, he's been above a 366 on base guy. I'll also mention he was acquired in a trade in 2023 at the deadline from the Angels for Lucas Giolito. And I really thought that it was a big piece they were getting rid of to acquire him. The White Sox landed an absolute gem, and another piece of that trade we'll go over later in the pitcher section. As we get into another piece of a trade here, Chase Meadroth, a 60 on the hit tool, and he's always been really good with that hit tool. He's really an interesting player. He walked 18.8% of the time in AAA with the Red Sox last year, but he only slugged 400 compared to his 437 on base. I think I see him more as a long-term second baseman for the White Sox than anything, but he's a guy who just doesn't strike out. 12.7% last year in 122 games. He only had 7 home runs. He doesn't have a ton of pop in his bat, but he can get on, and that's a very valuable tool to have as you move through the system. Caleb Boniber, another shortstop. He was drafted out of high school in the second round last year. He has yet to play at the minor league level yet. I'm going to be really interested to follow his career and see what he does all throughout the minors. He's their number 11 prospect right now. And then we'll go into Brian Ramos. He's a guy that's been in talks of coming up in recent years. He got 32 games at the major league level in 2024. Not a great sample, 64 weighted runs created plus. He was very good offensively in 2023 in the minors, 117 weighted runs created plus, but took a step back last year with a 92. We'll see what he ends up being as a long-term hitter. As I'll go into the notable outfield prospects, and we'll start off with another acquisition here, Braden Montgomery as part of the Garrett Crochet trade. This is an area in the system that doesn't have a lot of depth, and it was really wise of the White Sox to add a piece to that in that package. Montgomery was the 12th overall pick in the 2024 draft, and he actually was a two-way player last year, even though he only pitched in 2 games. Baseball America has him ranked as the number 66 overall prospect next year, and he has yet to debut at the minor league level. He has a very solid arm. He's got a lot of power. He'll be a really fun player to watch develop through this system. We'll go on to George Wolkow now. Lefty outfielder and a 7th round pick of the White Sox in 2023. He's had some really impressive numbers in the minors so far. In 91 games, 130 weighted runs created plus, 13 home runs, and a 12% walk rate. He did strike out 40% of the time last year. That's something to really keep an eye on as he keeps moving forward. He had good numbers. Number 6 prospect in the White Sox organization. While those two are very highly ranked for the White Sox, this is not an area of depth for them. The next 2 players are going to be unranked, but they did have very good stats in the minors last season. Riku Nishida and DJ Gladney. Nishida is already almost 24 years old. He played college at the University of Oregon, but he had 137 weighted runs created plus, walked 14.7% of the time, and only struck out 10.9% of the time last season in the minors. DJ Gladney was ranked as high as 21st on the White Sox rankings in 2021, but he took a big step back offensively in 2022. kind of made his way back up in 2024. 115 weighted runs created plus, still strikes out way too much, 29%, walked 7% of the time last season. Did have 16 home runs in 91 games. We'll see if he does anything moving forward. We'll get onto the pitching prospects here, and we got 3 guys that actually contributed at the major league level last year and could be part of this rotation moving forward. Drew Thorpe came over from the Padres as part of the Dylan Cease package last season, and he got some run at the MLB level. He's their number 7 prospect. In 44.1 innings last year, a 5.48 ERA, not great. The one thing with him, his changeup is incredible. He actually throws it more than any of his other pitches, 36% of the time. It had a positive 6 run value last year as a pitcher. Batters hit just 164 off of it. The WOBA was 251 off of that pitch, so it was very good. He just needs his other pitches to catch up to it, and he could be very good at the major league level. The White Sox were very excited to acquire him. Jairo Iriarte was also a part of that Dylan Cease trade, and unlike Cease, he had a ton of success at the major league level, although it was only 6 innings. 150 ERA in those 6 innings, 6 strikeouts. Expected batting average 166. Hard hit rate up in the top 10th percentile. He was very good at the major league level. Last year in the minors, a 3.71 ERA at AA and 122 strikeouts and 126 innings. I'll also mention that Drew Thorpe had a 1.35 ERA in 11 starts at AA last year, 56 strikeouts and 60 innings pitched. Kai Busch also got up 5.60 ERA in 4 games started, 17.2 innings pitched, so a little bit more of a run than Iriarte had. Combined 3.30 ERA over AA and AAA in the minors last year, a 2.12 in 14 starts at AA and a 7.01 in 4 at AAA. He was part of that Lucas Giolito trade in 2023 that I mentioned earlier. Mason Adams last year, a combined 2.92 ERA between AA and AAA, a 2.44 in AA and a 5.82 in AAA, so kind of similar to Kai Busch. I would expect him to be up at some point this year. And then Aldrin Batista to finish it off. He got up to high A last year. 10.04 Ks per 9, 2.08 walks per 9, a FIP of 229 in high A, 1.04 ERA, a combined 2.93 between A and high A last year. So he's a pitcher I really like in the future. We probably won't see him for a bit. So getting into the 2028 projected lineup, this is a group that could be incredible. This is straight from Baseball America. I took the liberty of adding the Red Sox guys from the Crochet trade into it because that was made before the Crochet trade happened. We'll see who the long-term catcher is between Caro and Teal. My guess is probably Teal. But there's a lot of guys here that have put up really good numbers at the minor league level. The scary thing about this, there's only 2 guys that are currently on the major league roster that are here in Vaughn and Vargas, so there could be a lot of variation. I think the White Sox are going to operate differently over the next couple of years, and they're really going to let their young guys earn their spots at the major league level. Potentially guys like Brooks Baldwin could be there. We could maybe see Luis Roberts still be here. I personally don't see that happening. If you're a White Sox fan, this is what you're looking forward to. Because if you have this lineup out there in 2028 and these guys live up to their prospect hype, you're going to have a heck of a future moving forward. And then closing it off, the 2028 rotation and closer. Look at this list, man. Noah Schultz, Hagen Smith, 24-24. This list doesn't even include Kai Busch or Mason Adams. It has Cannon and Burke still being there. I do definitely see that happening. I think Cannon's going to have some run at the major league level. I think Burke will be allowed a leash as well. Iriarte is listed as the closer on Baseball America, and I could see that happening. He does have 2 very solid pitches. I would like to see the White Sox give him some run at the starter, and hopefully Prelander earns that closer role to keep forever. I mean, you have such a solid group of pitching prospects that you don't even really know what to do. It's an embarrassment of riches at this point. You just got to get those guys developed through your system and get them up to the major league level because this is incredible. Look at this lineup projected in 2028, this rotation and closer projected in 2028. There's a lot to look forward to as a White Sox fan. So I want to say thank you so much if you're listening to the end of this video and you got here. It took me a really long time to make this entire series, and I'm going to get all these out before opening day. So thank you again. Hopefully the White Sox can turn it around in 2025. If not, make it a setup year for 2026. And there's a lot to look forward to for the Chicago White Sox.